Welcome to one of the biggest sections of the Mindthecolor extension, entirely dedicated to the retouching workflow. In fact, as you may already know, Carlo Diamanti, beyond being a photographer, is also a professional retoucher. And that's why, in this section, you will find a lot of techniques and tools that can be used by any professional retoucher in his daily workflow. Now, some of them are pretty advanced, but as you will see, we also have a lot of tools that can really speed up your workflow. The kind of tools that can fix a problem with just one click. So, let's take a look at this incredible collection of retouching tools. Before we go in depth, remember that the most used Photoshop tools for retouching are always available in this area of the panel. Now, if I click on Retouch, these are the tools available, and they are grouped together for skin retouch, dodge and burn, face retouch, and some utilities that we will see in a dedicated video. One of the most used techniques in high-end retouching, especially in the beauty field, is frequency separation, that here is available in two different versions. The first one is named Classic and uses the Gaussian blur filter for splitting special frequencies. I'm going to click on this button, and here we need to choose a blur radius for the thin detail we want to keep on the high frequency layer. The general rule is to raise the radius until we don't see the skin texture and the blemishes anymore. So I'm gonna point here. I usually don't go over 10, 12 pixels, depending on the kind of detail I have and also on the image size. Maybe I can increase a little bit more, like this. Well, 12 is okay. I click OK, and let's take a look at the layers we have. I'm going to turn off the visibility, and then on the low F layer we have the low frequencies, that is the blurred version of the image. On the high F layer we have the high frequencies generated by the Gaussian filter, and on the MF layer, now let's turn off this mask, we have a copy of the high frequencies layer inverted with a black mask that we can use to soften the high frequencies in case of need. Now this layer is set in linear light like the high frequencies layer, and the opacity is by default at 30%. And up in the layers palette, we also have a black and white adjustment layer that can help us to see better the retouching we are doing. And many professionals like this kind of help, as sometimes color can be distracting. Now, this version of frequency separation is done with only two layers, the high F layers and the low F layer. Therefore, when we work with any painting or retouching tool, we must remember to select an option here. For example, I'm going to choose the clone stamp. I'm going to set the opacity to 100%. And then we must remember to choose to sample the current layer in the tool sampling options. I'm going to turn off the MF layer, and now I can start to retouch. I'm going to choose a small brush here. I'm going to start to retouch. Now, I'm cloning on the high frequencies layer, so if I want to keep my workflow non-destructive, one way can be to duplicate the high frequencies layer, change the blending mode in normal, and then create a clipping mask with the high frequency with the original high frequencies layer. So now I can continue to retouch, and I can keep all the previous steps. So I'm gonna continue to retouch and remove all the blemishes. Okay, I think it's enough for now. It's just to show how this technique works. And that's before and that's after. again, before and after, so I can have my retouches on a separate layer, just in case I need to go back. In frequency separation, every professional has his own preference on how to do it, and also which tool to use. Now, for example, I usually start to retouch high frequencies with the clone stamp tool, because this can give me more control over the skin texture and the small details. But that's really not a rule. It's more like a matter of taste and the way you feel more comfortable. Now that I have retouched the high frequencies, I can retouch the low frequencies layer. And here I will create a separate layer from the beginning. So I'm gonna create a layer. I'm gonna create a clipping mask. And this time, as I have created an empty layer, I must change this option. And for sampling the current layer and below. And this time, I'm gonna zoom out a little bit. And maybe I'm gonna use a bigger brush with a very low opacity, like 10%. I'm gonna start to retouch the low frequencies. I can also use, for example, the flow for having more control. And sometimes I turn off the high frequencies so I can see more precisely the kind of retouching I'm doing. And here I can use the clone stamp tool, I can use a very soft brush. It's just a matter of taste, you know. And sometimes I also prefer to turn off the black and white adjustment layer to see the colors I'm doing. Okay, so far so good, and that's before and that's after. And this is the full retouch with the high frequencies. So that's the original image and that's my retouch. And of course, I can retouch even more of this image. Actually, there is a lot more to do on this image, but I only wanted to show you how this version of frequency separation works and how you can keep your workflow non-destructive. Now, the second version of frequency separation uses a different kind of filter for splitting the spatial frequencies, and it's the median filter instead of the Gaussian blur. For using this version, I'm gonna click on the FS median button, and here for the median filter, choosing the radius is a little bit more tricky, but the general rule is that I'm gonna increase the radius until I don't see the texture anymore. Maybe, oh no, this is too much. I'm gonna choose a 17 and click OK. And now let's take a look. Beyond the usual black and white layer, we already have a high frequencies layer for work and keeping non-destructive the workflow. In addition to that, we have a curves layer already set with a clipping mask to the high frequencies for work and name it solar. And this layer is just to enhance the high frequencies visibility. And you can see, if I zoom in, for example, how much better I can retouch the detail and the texture with this curves layer on. And this can be very useful, especially with some kind of images where the texture is not so defined. So I'm gonna adjust my clone stamp on a small brush, and I'm gonna set the current layer here, and then I will start to retouch. Now, once I finished, I can create a clipping mask with the original high frequencies layer. I'm gonna turn off the solar curve, and you can see my retouch now. That's before, and that's after. And after that, I can start to retouch the low frequencies. So I'm gonna turn off the high frequencies layer, and you can see how different is the structure of the image from the previous version thanks to the median filter. Also, we already have the low frequencies for work here, for keeping everything non-destructive. So I'm gonna choose a bigger brush, maybe a lower opacity, like previously we have done 20%, and start to retouch. Okay, I think it's enough, and that's before and that's after. And this is with the high frequencies layer, before and after the high frequencies. Let's turn off the black and white adjustment layer. And so that's the original, and that's my retouched version. Okay, I think you get the idea now. But as you have seen, there is no fixed rule for doing frequency separation and the kind of tool to use. But what I like about the way it's done inside the Mindthecolor extension is that I have two different versions with two different blurring filters. Now, besides frequency separation or after frequency separation, very often professional retouchers do another technique that is called dodge and burn. And again, this is done in two different versions inside the Mindthecolor extension. Okay, so I'm gonna close this group. And here, if I click on the dodge and burn gray, you can see that here in this layers group, I have again a black and white adjustment layer. So I can concentrate on the luminosity of the image. And now I have a 50% gray layer set in soft light blending mode, on which I can paint with a white or a black brush set at a very low opacity. Something around 5%, and also a very low flow. And I can start to lighten or darken the areas I need with black or white. Here I'm gonna paint with a white brush just to brighten this area of the skin, maybe this area. I'm gonna zoom out. And you can see the kind of effect we have. It's very subtle. And that's before and that's after. Here, the settings are just a matter of taste and the kind of control you want to have on your image. Okay, here I can use a black. And this technique can keep the structure of the image, because it's only lightening and darkening what I already have. Okay, before and after. And I would say this is enough for showing you this technique. Now, the other version of the dodge and burn is done with a different approach, and is done through two adjustment layers. So I'm going to throw this dodge and burn soft group. I'm going to click on the dodge and burn curve. And this is how it's done, this version of dodge and burn. Here we have a curve for darkening. You can see the kind of curve I have with a black mask, and here I have a curve for lightening. Both curves layer are featuring a black mask. So here is just a matter of painting with a white brush on the mask of the layer we need. Here, for example, I'm gonna choose the lighten layer. I'm gonna come here and paint again with the white brush. And that's before and that's after. And this is what I've done on the mask. Now, this approach is more flexible because beyond the opacity and also painting on the layer mask, I can also change the lightening curve and the darkening curve. So I have more control over images. And this can help in an image like this, for example, where there is not so much to retouch. So I think dodge and burn with the curves is the right kind of move. I'm gonna click here. So I can paint on the darken layer. I'm going to use a very large brush. I can go further. And that's before and that's after. And then I can start to paint on the light and curve mask. Here, for example, I'm going to choose a different opacity. And here we go. This is before and this is after. And this is without the black and white adjustment layer. So that's before and that's after. Now, the advantage of this version is that I can modify the curves for pushing the effect even more without any additional painting. So if I want to darken even more, I can lower this point in the curve. And so that's before and that's after. And also I can lighten. Okay, so I gain some visibility in the hair here. Maybe I can, let me check this mask. Okay, I can blur this mask even more with the Gaussian blur filter. I'm going to choose a very high radius. So that's before and that's after. I think it works better. And that's before and that's after. And that's the original, and this is the version with dodge and burn. As you can see, maximum flexibility and control thanks to the way these techniques are done in the panel. Now, let's take a look at all the other tools that can really speed up your workflow. I'm talking about, of course, the face retouch tools. And on our first image, like this one, I'm going to turn off this layer. I'm going to close the group. I'm going to click on the Retouch Teeth button. As you see here, I have two adjustment layers. The first one is a curve layer, the light curve layer, and is set in a screen mode with a black mask. This is without the mask and this with the mask. So I can paint on this layer to lighten the teeth. And the second is the desaturate layer. And this is for all the cases in which the teeth can have a color cast, usually a yellow or a warm cast. So I can paint, for example, on the light layer. I'm going to choose a smaller brush. I'm going to zoom in. I'm going to see what I get when I paint. Okay, let's take a look at the mask. Okay. That's before and that's after. And now I can alt drag this mask on the desaturate layer. So I get the same mask on this layer. And this is before and this is after. A very subtle effect that you can see here. Before and after. And the nice thing is that this layer is not affecting all the colors, but only the kind of colors we have usually in teeth, like the yellows, for example. And in this way, we can still desaturate all the additional colors if we need. In this image, of course, that's before and that's after. And this is what the desaturate layer is doing. Is not so evident because the teeth here are not so yellow. Now, besides the teeth, I have a Retouch Eyes button. And let's take a look at the layers. Here in the white eyes group, we have all the layers for the sclera, and they are pretty similar to the teeth retouch layers. So we have a curve set in screen mode and a hue saturation for desaturing usually the yellows. Just below, we have two layers for the iris, one for darkening set in multiply mode and one for lightening set in screen mode. Okay, for these layers, I'm going to switch to a different image, like this one, and then I press retouch eyes, and then we can start to retouch the eyes. And here I'm going to paint on the sclera. Just whiten the eyes. Okay, before and after. And now I'm going to alt drag the mask on the desaturate layer. So this is white eyes, before and after. And now I can retouch the iris with all the dedicated layers. So I'm going to paint on the dark one here. Okay, and that's before and that's after. And then I can brighten the iris here to create more contrast. And as you can see, that's before and that's after. You can, of course, adjust the opacity of every single layer. Maybe this is too much. Okay, so I'm gonna lower the opacity, kind of 70%. Okay, so now the effect is more subtle and we see the light in the eyes that can really enhance our image. And just below the retouch eyes button, we have the hair light button. This adds an adjustment layer, a curve adjustment layers in linear dodge. And we can use this with a very large brush to add some light in the hair. And this is the kind of retouch that is useful for adding some light strokes that can enhance the hair. That's before and that's after. And now I can click on the lip extrude button. And before doing this, remember to select a bitmap layer. So I'm going to click again the button. And what I get here is a bitmap layer with a kind of a sharpening. You can see this. That can add more detail to the lips. So I'm going to choose a different brush, a smaller one, maybe this time with a bigger opacity. And paint over the lips, of course. Let's take a look at the mask. Okay, that's fine. And that's before and that's after. Not a big move, I would say, but an effective one, made with just one click and some quick painting. And just besides the lip extrude, we have the correct skin tone button. Basically, what it does is to add some yellow to the skin tones, or if you prefer, to remove some magenta. Let me turn off the mask, you can see here. And also you can see the effect on all the skin tone. And this can be useful for all those cases in which we have some redness in the face, or when we have some redness, for example, in the body, in the hands, the legs, and so on. So I can go and paint here with a very large brush in the areas where I can feel more red, like the nose, for example, or just here in this area, close to the lips, and maybe also here on the nose. And also here, maybe here. Okay, so before and after, before and after. A very subtle move that can help you to remove some redness in the skin tone. And another nice tool is the emphasize freckles. I'm going to change the image, of course. I'm going to switch on an image like this. And here, when I click on the emphasize freckles, I need to choose first the right radius for the Gaussian blur. The right value is when the freckles disappear. So I'm going to start from maybe 9. Okay, a little bit more. Okay, 31, 32, it's fine. I'm going to click OK. And then I need to choose the radius for the eye pass filter. And here the right value is when I start to see the freckles again. So I'm going to start with a very low value. Okay, now I'm beginning to see something here. Okay, back again. Something like this can be okay. Maybe 20 pixels is fine. I'm going to click OK and see what I get. And now I can paint on the layer mask. I'm going to zoom in. Maybe 100% opacity. And you can see that the freckles are emphasized. Here, for example. Or here. No, maybe this is too much here. I'm going to paint with the black here. And then back with the white. And that's before and that's after. And this is what I've done on the mask. And of course, we should keep in mind that with this kind of technique, we are going to enhance the skin texture as well. Now, the freckles tool can be tricky to set up correctly. So my suggestion is to make some tests and find the right combination of the Gaussian blur and the high pass filter for the kind of images you have to retouch. And the last tool I want to show you is the sharpening tool. Basically, what it does is to apply sharpening with some fixed parameters. Now, this is not a tool for the perfect sharpening, of course, but it's the tool for getting some sharpening with just one click. So I'm going to switch back on my previous image. And when I click on the sharpen button, I need to select a bitmap layer. So my suggestion is to make a copy of all the visible layers on a new layer by choosing in the layer menu, merge visible by pressing the Alt key. So I have a copy of all the visible layers on a new one, and then press the sharpen button. And when I turn off the mask, you can see the kind of sharpening I have. Let me zoom in a little bit. And this is without the mask, and this is with the mask. And here, of course, I can paint on the layer mask. So I'm going to choose a smaller brush. And for example, I will for sure paint on the eyebrows, maybe on the eyes, just a little bit less with 50% opacity. And I can also paint on the lips. So I can get more sharpening even after the lip extrude command. Okay, that's before and that's after. Now this layer is set in soft light mode, but I can change it if I want a stronger effect to overlay, or even vivid light or linear light for the maximum effect. Okay, this is too much. It's just to showing you how we can do things here. So I'm going to switch back to overlay maybe. And this is before and this is after. And again, the kind of sharpening you want to add to the image, it's up to you. And with the sharpening tool, we have now completed our tour through the retouching tools inside the Mindthecolor extension. As you have seen, we have a complete collection of very advanced techniques, and also fast and effective tools for beauty retouching, portrait retouching, and many other kind of images. Now, we still have one more tool to watch, the false color, but if you have seen another video, the CurveM video, then you know that false color is actually a utility, not a retouching tool. I suggest you to watch that video because you can see how helpful can be false color when you have to match different colors, especially in different images. Otherwise, I suggest you to watch another video, that is the utility video, in which I will talk about the amazing collection of utilities available inside the Mindthecolor extension.